go to the wide receiver spot, and we're going to do a blackjack split. I'm going to look to trade for both of these players. And the first one is T. Higgins. And T. Higgins has seen some short-term bump up, but this is still a player where the manager holding Higgins might actually think they're kind of selling high because they're selling you T. Higgins during the Jamar Chase contract dispute, contract negotiations, whatever you want to call it. But T. Higgins has been a player that's been frustrating for some dynasty managers for many seasons. Last year, Higgins dealt with a hamstring issue. Higgins has been a player that we've always sort of wanted more from. But what Higgins is going to get is Higgins is going to get an insane contract this offseason. He's going to enter the open market, and someone is going to pay Higgins a ton of money. And a lot of teams might view him as their wide receiver one. So we look at the contract that a player like Calvin Ridley got this offseason. That's what we're going to see for T. Higgins.
What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
What's going on? This is Theo Gremminger from Fantasy Points, and I'm here to give you 8 players that can help turbocharge your dynasty rebuild. So maybe you're going into the season right now with your dynasty team, and this is not your year. You're going to be realistic, and you're going to build for the future. So when we get to next year, the following year, and more years to come, you have yourself set up to dominate your dynasty league. First off, we want to make sure we're being smart with our rosters. If you have some older players, we've already reached the season. It's time to sell on performances. So if I've happened to hold an older running back and I didn't move him, I'm not going to sell for peanuts right before the season. I'm going to risk it, and I'm going to see if this player can gain a little bit of value. Would it be easier for you to sell Aaron Jones right now, a couple days before the season? Or would it be easier for you to sell Aaron Jones if he drops a 20-point PPR week in week 2? It's always going to be the latter. You're always going to have people willing to pay for performances in your league. Even smart fantasy managers are going to be a little bit influenced by what they saw last week in Dynasty. So I'm going to not panic sell my older players if I've already waited this long to do so. Give yourself another week or two. With a few of these players, it's going to help you out. You always run the risk of an injury, but that's a risk that I'd be willing to take if I've held them for this long. But let's talk about a couple players that you can buy, players to prioritize in trades for your dynasty rebuild. And let's talk about 2 quarterbacks. A lot of times, dynasty managers don't want holding zeros, especially if they have teams that are contenders in their league. So when you drafted a Michael Penix during the summer, a lot of times the team that drafted them were the team that was in especially a superflex format. They're drafting in the early second round, late first round. Some of these teams are contenders this year. I'm going to price check Michael Penix often throughout this season. Is Michael Penix on the Jordan Love trajectory where he's not going to help you at all for many seasons? Or is he going to be more along the lines of a Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson trajectory where it's 1 year and then he's running the team? When it comes to the value of rookie quarterback contracts these days, I'm going to go with the latter. I think Michael Penix is going to be on the field before we're not going to have to wait till these panic arguments that you're not going to see him for 2-3 years. I don't necessarily see that. I think Michael Penix could be the quarterback as early as 2025 in Atlanta, because there is massive value in using a quarterback on a rookie contract in today's NFL. And the Atlanta Falcons took him in the top 10 for a reason. I think they like him a lot, and I think we're going to see him sooner than later. So I'm going to price check the manager holding him and see if maybe they get a little uncomfortable holding zeros on their bench when they could have somebody who can help them win right now. And I'm going to do the same thing with J.J. McCarthy. J.J. McCarthy was a player that I thought lost value already, and I know he has because we're starting to see some reduced trades. But when it comes down to it, J.J. McCarthy was a player that we really liked throughout the process. This was a Brett Whitefield favorite right here at Fantasy Points. And follow his content. J.J. McCarthy was a player that he was betting on big time. And nothing has really changed. This was going to be a transition season for J.J. McCarthy, a redshirt season for a lot of the year with Sam Darnold starting. Now it's going to be Sam Darnold starting for the season and J.J. McCarthy taking over in 2025. Again, I'm going to price check the manager in my league that's holding JJ McCarthy, and I'm going to see if they want to take somebody that can help them this year. And I will have a chance to add a long-term starter for my Superflex Dynasty roster. JJ McCarthy has mobility. He has an arm. He won a ton in college, and he's going to play alongside some of the best targets in football, arguably the best wide receiver in the game in Justin Jefferson, alongside TJ Hockenson, Jordan Addison, and also a strong scheme and strong offensive line. Going to the tight end position, a deep sleeper for you to add is Cade Stover, rookie in Houston. This is an interesting one because we've seen this scenario play out before. Dalton Schultz boxed out another young tight end when he was in Dallas, and that was Jake Ferguson. We all know how Jake Ferguson did last season. Now we talk about Dalton Schultz boxing out another young tight end in Cade Stover. This could be a year, but whenever Cade Stover takes over, he's going to be a highly valued player, especially in tight end premium formats. Cade Stover checks off a lot of boxes. He can catch the football. He has athleticism, and he also has the locker room narrative. He played with CJ Stroud, and that familiarity is going to shine through. We saw what CJ Stroud was able to do for Dalton Schultz, and what he was also able to do for a short period of time for Brevin Jordan, where he was a waiver wire pickup last week. So CJ Stroud is a quarterback that we want pass catchers on. Cade Stover is the cheapest access I can get to a Houston pass catcher right now in Dynasty. Take some shots on the Cade Stover. And if you want a more highly pedigreed tight end, let's talk about TJ Hockenson. Because TJ Hockenson, I'm looking to buy whenever I can in Dynasty. He is a really, really strong talent. We've seen it for seasons, for multiple seasons. He has contract insulation in Minnesota where he is insulated in the fact that they're not going to get rid of him. This is their long-term tight end and a tight end that's been featured there. Averaged 14.5 points per game in PPR last year. This is a guy that we can bank on for seasons to come. But the manager holding him right now is not going to have him for at least about a month of the season. Now, this is one that's going to cost you a little bit, but you might get your long-term tight end. And it comes down to it is, does this manager want to hold zeros? If I can pivot from a player like David Njoku to TJ Hockenson, I think I'm going to do that as much as I like Njoku. If I have an older tight end like a George Kittle, can I heat check the TJ Hockenson manager and see if they want instant points? It's not going to work in every dynasty league. And some of you are going to say, hey, that doesn't work in my league, but it works in some dynasty leagues. Some dynasty leagues managers just do not want to hold zeros. And let's take a shot on trading for TJ Hockenson. If he will turbocharge your rebuild, because you're going to have him down the road. You could actually trade him again. If you get him and he comes back and starts smashing, you could trade for more than you traded for him, or you could simply hold. And in 2025, you're going to have a player that's like a top 6 fantasy football tight end. And that's probably his floor when he's healthy. Let's go to a very, very highly pedigreed player. But again, this is a guy that you're going to have to hold for zeros. And let's look at where Jonathan Brooks went in your dynasty rookie draft. If it was a super flex league, Jonathan Brooks may have gone to the manager drafting out of like the 110, the 109, the 111 in some cases. So these are managers who are contenders. Now, Jonathan Brooks is going to miss at least the first month of the season. Could this linger? Could this tail on for a little bit longer? I'm sure that the fear of Jonathan Brooks missing more time than a month is on the mind of the manager rostering them. Now, could we kick the tires on a Jonathan Taylor trade and see if this manager would like to get 85, 90% of what they paid for Jonathan Brooks in terms of rookie capital? Jonathan Brooks is a two-way back. This is a player that when he steps on an NFL football field, he is going to smash. He can catch passes. He is a very strong runner, and he plays in the Dave Canales system that produced a top 5 running back season for Rachaad White, where Rachaad White had incredible volume. So Jonathan Brooks long-term, actually 2025, Jonathan Brooks is going to be a player that I believe will be a top 3 round redraft pick and will be a player that we can lean on in Dynasty as a foundational asset for our team. But this year, it could be a little bit of a struggle, at least for him to get going with the injury. Do they ramp him up? So I'm going to price check him and make sure that the manager in my league is not like thinking about selling. You never know unless you make that offer. And would I trade a player like Rachaad White, who I think will get volume earlier in the year to get a Jonathan Brooks? Absolutely. Would I trade a James Cook? Unless my roster was set to win now, I absolutely am thinking about making trades like that. Backs that have value and have utility to get the future incredible dynasty asset. I'm looking to do that with Jonathan Brooks. Go to the wide receiver spot, and we're going to do a blackjack split. I'm going to look to trade for both of these players. And the first one is T. Higgins. And T. Higgins has seen some short-term bump up, but this is still a player where the manager holding Higgins might actually think they're kind of selling high because they're selling you T. Higgins during the Jamar Chase contract dispute, contract negotiations, whatever you want to call it. But T. Higgins has been a player that's been frustrating for some dynasty managers for many seasons. Last year, Higgins dealt with a hamstring issue. Higgins has been a player that we've always sort of wanted more from. But what Higgins is going to get is a insane contract this offseason. He's going to enter the open market, and someone is going to pay Higgins a ton of money. And a lot of teams might view him as their wide receiver one. So we look at the contract that a player like Calvin Ridley got this offseason. That's what we're going to see for T. Higgins. T. Higgins also is considerably younger than Ridley, and Ridley got that insane contract from Tennessee. Wide receiver contracts are going up and up and up in this league. T. Higgins is a player that you can kind of talk yourself into trading for him in multiple builds, but certainly on a rebuild team, there is a chance that he goes and gains 10 to 20% more total targets on the team he signs with. Let's stay at the wide receiver position. Let's stay in Cincinnati, and let's talk about Jermaine Burton. This is going to be the eventual T. Higgins replacement. And now you're able to actually get Jermaine Burton a little bit cheaper because Andre Yoshivas is running ahead of him and getting the slot usage. Burton, it was a third-round pick out of Alabama, also played at Georgia, was a player with a lot more talent than his draft capital reflected. This is a player that bounced around from some schools and was a guy that certain NFL teams were just off of. Cincinnati, though, was on. And with T. Higgins likely moving on this offseason, I would bet on Jermaine Burton being on the field in two wide receiver sets in Cincinnati. I think he's going to gain a ton of dynasty value in the 2025 offseason. And right now you're getting him for cheap. This is a player that I want on all of my rebuilding rosters. And one more player that is a must get for rebuilding teams at the wide receiver spot, Jalen McMillan. Now, McMillan has gained some dynasty value, but he still hasn't gained an exceptional amount of dynasty value. McMillan tore it up in preseason, in OTAs, in you name it. With the Baker Mayfield has been highly praising him. You've also had the Tampa Bay beat reporters highly praising McMillan. McMillan's a guy that's being drafted in redraft leagues right now, like the FFPC, as like a 15th rounder. So people are betting on him as an upside stash for this year. But for a rebuilding team, this is a player that is the number 3 wide receiver in Tampa Bay, but he's playing alongside the oldest wide receiver combo in the league in Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. If either of those players miss time, Jalen McMillan is going to gain an exceptional amount of value. You talk about McMillan. McMillan was a player that led Washington in receptions in 2022 alongside Rome Odunze and alongside Jalen Polk. Last year, he was banged up and was the 3rd selected Washington Huskies wide receiver. Probably would have been a second-round pick if he didn't get hurt. This is a player that has a bright future in Tampa Bay, and I want him on as many rebuilding rosters as possible. I'm Theo Gremminger. Look for more videos like this at Fantasy Points all season long. I'm going to help you win in Dynasty. Check out my written work. I'm dropping a Dynasty article at Fantasy Points every single week as well. I'll see you soon.